It's my pleasure today to talk to José Ciro Martínez, whose article has won the Review of International Studies annual prize for the best article published by the journal in 2020. So congratulations to José. José is a junior research fellow at Trinity College, University of Cambridge, and he's published a number of articles on the Syrian conflict, amongst other things. And his article, Topological Twists in the Syrian Conflict, Rethinking Space Through Bread, is published in Review International Studies, Volume 46, Number 1, and there'll be details in the notes for this video to help you locate that if you want to download it and read it, and I can strongly recommend it. It's a fascinating article. The article challenges traditional readings of international relations in terms of space and scale, arguing that ideas of territory are inadequate to understand the articulation of entities into complex networks of actors through which authority is performed. And it looks in particular at the way in which bread as a material object embodies the performance of authority. So the Syrian regime and opposition have attempted to ensure the supply of affordable bread as a way of performing authority. And the supply chains for subsidized bread merge state actors, NGOs, private companies, paramilitary forces, and so on. And the article shows that, as Jose puts it, thinking topologically pushes us to eschew easy categorizations of the conflict as a proxy war to scrutinize, instead, the concrete practices and technologies of government that shape how military victories are won, civilians starved, and political authority performed. So it really kind of proposes to reshape our understanding of space, spatiality, authority, power. And the judges noted that the article demonstrates the explanatory richness of treating spatial categories as produced by interactions and practices, rather than as given by our usual static assumptions about flat territory and centers of power. By introducing insights from critical human geography, Martinez opens promising avenues for research. His article is an intellectually ambitious, theoretically innovative, and empirically rigorous piece of research that deserves a wide readership across the discipline. So it's really nice to talk to Jose today. I just wondered if we could start off with a kind of with a question about what led you to write about this topic. Why did you become interested in bread as an embodiment of authority in the Syrian conflict?
So first, Martin, thank you for having me. It's an honor to have won the prize, and a very generous introduction. So what led me to write about the topic is sort of quite personal. I mean, I spent a year living in Syria between 2010 and 2011. I went to improve my Arabic, and I ended up doing a homestay with a family. And after a few days, I realized that the head of the household was a baker. And as a way of sort of trying to, informally improve my Arabic, to sort of chat with a diverse group of people, I asked if I could tag along. And so this was sort of an entryway into bread, its importance. And the thing that always struck me from the first day was the way subsidized bread was described in Syria. So it's still called khubz al-dawla, which means bread of the state. And so it's quite literally stamped with an imprimatur of political authority. And, the mind started working and the possibilities were endless. And then sort of sadly, I haven't been able to go back. And I kept in touch with a lot of the people I met there. And one of the things that constantly came up in conversation was bread. Who was providing it, what its price was, how often it arrived, when it was not there. And so the idea sort of emerged out of those, both the initial experience in Damascus and then the sort of constant conversations afterwards, when the hold on bread became much more tenuous for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, and I think that it comes out quite, this sort of the way in which bread plays this kind of critical role for kind of people's perceptions of the conflict comes out really well in the article, and the way in which it's a kind of material embodiment of power is very clear. I wanted, could you, if you had to sum up what the kind of key kind of argument or key sort of insight of the article is, how would you sum it up?
So I'd add to the summary you offered at the beginning, which was quite comprehensive, that what I'm really trying to do is question the epistemological monopoly of territory and scale and analysis of the Syrian conflict. So your standard account of civil war in not just Syria, but other places often relies on sort of territory and scale, be it the nation, be it the sort of geopolitical or international system. They're always static and they're assumed. And so I try to challenge these static conceptualizations of space. And I do it by analyzing how seemingly remote actors, so US aid appears, different types of wheat sellers, how these seemingly remote actors influence wartime outcomes. And so I posit that we should rethink the language of proxies, foreign patrons, which often appear when we talk about the Syrian conflict, and think instead about the ways relationships matter more than distance, practices of connection more than geopolitical position or a priori forms of alliance. More simply, I try to demonstrate why spatial categories should be analyzed and unpacked rather than assumed. To bring in a brief example from the Syrian conflict, what we often see are these color-coded maps of territorial jurisdiction, which are routinely deployed in newspapers and sort of evening news bulletins to represent the current state of the conflict, right? You have territories partitioned and parceled into bounded units of authority and control. Whether they're controlled by the Assad regime or the opposition, they're always portrayed as these series of color-coded blocks across which power flows effortlessly. Authority in these arrangements is exercised over bounded territorial plots or neatly demarcated scales. And so, through the example of bread, I try to demonstrate not that external allies or financial assistance are irrelevant, but that notions of space premised on territory or scale are far too blunt an instrument through which to comprehend how they are made relevant in practice. So what I try to do is trace the way people, organizations, and things like bread, flour, wheat connect Damascus to Tehran, Idlib to Istanbul, and how actors seek to maintain these connections so as ensure reliable supplies of food, funds, and firepower.
Yeah, I mean, what I really like about the way you do it is you kind of you use a sort of very different vocabulary. You know, you talk about kind of folding and how international kind of actors can reach into the conflict rather than talking in terms of kind of control of territory and that sort of thing. I mean, what does it mean to you to talk about a topological? Because you talk about this in the article. You call it a topological understanding of sort of power and politics. I mean, how do you understand that term topological? What does it mean to have that kind of understanding?
So to me, thinking topologically means examining power relationships not as located in certain scalar containers like territory, like municipalities or provinces, or that power relationships are extended easily across territory, as if what happens in Russia or the funds that come from Russia easily arrive in Syria, but instead to think about how space is produced through these connections. Space is a process in the making, one that takes its form and contours through a mix of elements, some close by, others folded in, as you said, from afar. Most fundamentally, I'd say a topological understanding seeks to unpack specific relations at play and to scrutinize the twists and turns through which actors make their presence felt in the here and now of daily life. So it foregrounds mainly process, relation, connection. And so I try to draw on it, and it comes, I recommend people, for those interested, that they look at the work of John Allen and Alan Cochrane. And I try to take their work, which really is invested in thinking about space as produced, and I try to think about how we can use their vocabularies to unpack the ways political authority is practiced and assembled, often in ways that defy conventional mappings. Rather than locate power in institutions or geographic containers, we can begin to think about how practices of government coalesce as part of a spatial arrangement in which private agencies, NGOs, foreign governments, and local organizations all exercise powers of reach through which they seek to make their presence felt.
So just in terms of Syria, this kind of topological understanding, how does it help us kind of grapple with the complexities? You know, because you talk about kind of the way in which we often see that in terms of territorial mapping and things like that. And if we have this kind of topological understanding, how does that help us to kind of represent the Syrian conflict in a different way, to talk about power, authority, violence in different kinds of way, to kind of think about those complexities in a different way?
So to me, what was sort of enlightening and illuminating from topological understandings is that it pushed against so much of what I was reading on Syria, which I found so unfulfilling, right? So one of my big problems with a lot of the literature on Syria is that Syria just becomes a sort of fixed territorial platform upon which nefarious machinations occur, a mere stage upon which an international political drama plays out, right? So we're talking about Russia versus the US, Turkey versus Qatar, and far too often in these accounts, Syrians themselves, the people I was talking to about bread, about political authority, they just disappear entirely from this analysis. They have little agency. They're just playing out this sort of international drama. And I think this does a disservice to the way the conflict not only plays out, but to the people on the ground who are the ones involved in these enactments of political authority. So I think what topological understandings offer to those interested in the Syrian conflict is that it pushes us to think beyond the terms of a proxy war and to think instead of the concrete practices of government that shape how military victories are won, civilians starved, and political authority performed. And, you know, I was often challenged on this sort of understanding. And what I don't want to say is that we should overlook blanket acts of violence overwhelmingly employed, for example, by the Assad regime, which remain among the most conspicuous registers of power in Syria today and for the last decade, nor the fact that different opposition actors have varying goals and ways of governing. I'm not trying to equalize everyone. But what it does entail, I think, is to ponder forms of connection. For example, the Assad regime's ability to leverage resources to feed people on a prolonged basis is not just a question of foreign ties. It's not automatic that Russian wheat becomes Syrian bread. It's also about the way these resources are drawn on and employed, the various ways they are used to advantage so as to fold into the here and now of daily life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think this kind of question about sort of how we trace relationships rather than just, you know, ideas of kind of control over territory is the really important insight that this article, you know, kind of puts forward. And if we were going to move beyond Syria and, you know, talk to kind of IR scholars about you know, what a topological analysis can offer, I guess I've got a couple of questions. So I suppose the first question would be, so, you know, how can a topological analysis sort of help us to understand things like sovereignty, for example? And I guess, you know, you've looked at bread and for some personal and also for some contextual reasons. But if we were going to look at questions of sovereignty, what other objects did, you know, come to mind as things we could trace through these kinds of networks of relationships?
So to start with your first question, I don't want to argue that all of IR is getting everything wrong because of their understandings of territory or scale. They get a lot of it right. They understand the facts on the ground, who, what, where. But what I'm trying to push for is more an understanding of why and how, what is going on, right? So how is it that places connect? How is it that foreign patrons make it so that they can send certain resources to their allies on the ground? In terms of the types of objects or the types of practices we could study, I mean, I think the possibilities are endless. John Allen has like these fantastic analyses of the different companies that provide water to London and how it is that the outsourcing of water provision to Australian hedge funds or Qatari businesses transform the way people engage with the most basic needs in everyday life, such as water. So I'd say the possibilities are quite endless in terms of what topological understandings can help us unpack. So my own interests lead me to think about governmental practices, things like the provision of healthcare, the capacity to imprison or enforce legal norms. But objects that I think would be absolutely fascinating to track would be things like water, cement, or maybe even certain medicines, all the things that undergird the ways political authority is enacted in particular places. And so I'd say that, and I think the best theoretical works, like the John Allen and Alan Cochrane work on topologies, they make us think about all sorts of objects, right? They might speak to me in certain ways, but they will speak to you in different ones. And that's its brilliance. And so I'd encourage people to engage with the work. And I'm sure things that have not even occurred to me will occur to others in terms of what types of objects could be traced.
I mean, I think that how question is really important. And it comes through really strongly when you talk about, you know, the production of distance or the production of space and so on. That how question comes through very strongly and is something that, you know, is really worth, you know, how is power practiced, for example, or enacted, I think is a really important question. So a kind of final question, what are you going to work on next? What are you working on at the moment?
I mean, to add a bit to what you just said, I mean, the question of distance, I'm sort of engaging with at the moment. So I just took a ferry recently from southern Spain to northern Morocco. And even though they're 45 minutes away, southern Spain is administratively, politically, far more connected to Madrid, which is 6 hours to the north, than the northern coast of Morocco, which is 45 minutes to the south. So geographic distance is often it doesn't entail sort of political distance, let's say. So at the moment, I'm working on a new project that I'm just starting. It's very much preliminary, and it's on the contraband and the trafficking mainly of hashish between the northern coast of Morocco and this one region called the Rif, where 70% of the world's hash is produced, and the southern coast of Spain. And so some of these questions of geographies of connection are also involved. I'm trying to think about the illicit and its relation to political outcomes. But yeah, it's still very much at the sort of beginning stages, but questions of distance are very much sort of at the forefront in terms of the sort of animating questions that are leading me that I'm thinking about, and I will be thinking about for the next few years.
Fantastic. We look forward to reading that. You know, thanks for joining us today, and congratulations again on winning the article prize. And I recommend everybody downloads it, reads it. It's really a fascinating piece of work.
Thank you so much. It's a huge honor to win the prize, and I really appreciate having had the opportunity to share my research with everyone.
Thank you.